Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we are looking at Proverbs 25 and 26, and today we are getting into the second edition, the director's cut of Proverbs. I bet you may not have known that that was the case, but it is. If you're reading in the ESV, the heading is More Proverbs of Solomon, and the first line is, There also are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, the king of Judah, copied. So this tells us that King Hezekiah discovered these additional chapters, some of them.
Black market copies.
Hidden or rediscovered or something. And they were put into the text about 200 years after Solomon wrote them. So the first edition of Proverbs did not include these chapters. But today, as we read the scriptures, we are reading what would have been completed, I think, around 700. Yeah, between 700 and 600 BC. So this is kind of cool. We're getting some additional extra credit chapters. They've been around for a very long time, but they are not what they initially had.
So that's kind of cool, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know that before we started recording, so I am equally surprised. So a couple things that stuck out to me today. There are two things. The first is that I'm noticing there's a lot of repetition of taking physical pain and suffering and comparing it to some kind of spiritual, I guess, what would you call that? Like a
plight.
Spiritual. Okay, sure. That's a great word. Plight. So if you look at chapter 25, verse 14, the verse says, like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of a gift he does not give. So that is like maybe not, that's more like a land type thing, but I know for us, we have been having a very dry time. And the anticipation of rain when you see clouds coming, which has actually happened to us over this past week. We did get rain, thank God. But there have been moments where clouds come in, it's real dark, and then they continue to just push on through, and there's no rain. And there's like this huge like disappointment. Like you see the actual physical clouds there, and then there's nothing, and it's just like this huge disappointment. So I like that it gives us that same tension when we think about like, if somebody boasts about a gift he doesn't have or does not give, I suppose, it's like those clouds and wind without rain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like you can talk all about it, but if you have nothing to show, like it's pretty disappointing.
So you get like all those around you really excited about what's coming.
Yes.
And then you never really intended to deliver it, or you really struggle in delivering it, and it's just ultimately very disappointing. And everybody feels like our sugar snap peas out in the garden, just hoping for rain.
They're sad. Anyway, two other verses where this same kind of like physical versus spiritual is pretty obvious is same chapter, 25, verse 19. Trusting in a treacherous man in the time of trouble is like a bad tooth or a foot that slips. I think we can all relate to those things. Like you can't escape it. If you're going to fall, you're going to fall. If you've got a bad tooth, you're going to suffer through. So it compares that again to trusting in a treacherous person in the time of trouble. Like, you're going to suffer greatly because of it. So again, just like that kind of those wisdom verses of like remembering to be wise in who you put your trust in, because you will have those same ramifications. And then finally, this one was probably like my favorite because I don't know, it felt like it made the most sense or was one of the best comparisons. Same chapter again, 25 verse 27. It is not good to eat much honey, nor is it glorious to seek one's own glory. We all know what it's like to like eat too much of something, specifically sweet things. You feel sick. And that same comparison is, nor is it glorious to seek one's own glory. Okay, like there's like this comparison of seeking your own glory. You're just going to end up alone and sad. And like, there's not going to be people around. You're going to be like that sick feeling almost like, oh man, I cared so much about myself that like, I got nothing to show for it. So I like those comparisons that I picked up on throughout specifically 25.
How do you know when you're seeking your own glory and like what's the difference between seeking your own glory and being confident in your skills?
Compromise.
Tell me more about that.
I was going to say, like, when it's for your own glory, you start to compromise things that you, like, definitely stand for, believe in.
So you're just, like...
And, like, pushing other people out of the way. What was the other one?
Like, confidence. Like,
confidence.
How do you know it's not just... you?
I think confidence, you have good intentions. And when it's for your own glory, you compromise things and you think only of yourself.
Interesting.
That's just my thought.
That's interesting.
I don't know.
That's what I think about when I read over these. I mean, because Proverbs is full of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
like, be humble, be humble, be humble. And it's like, well, okay, so is humble just you never do anything because you're allowing everybody else to do all the things all the time? Or is there like room for, hey, I'm actually like gifted and talented in this area. I would like to do these things. Like, how's that work?
Perhaps too, not necessarily just compromising things, but also, like, what are your intentions with that?
Yeah, I suppose. So is it like, are you trying to make yourself big?
Right. Or better.
Or are you
or the
trying
best.
to contribute to God's kingdom?
Right.
Or are you submitted to God's will? Interesting.
Anyway, last thing, quick, before we scoot right along. So that was the first thing, those comparisons of like spiritual versus physical things.
Yeah.
The second was I noticed there are two instances, perhaps I missed some, I'm not sure, but two instances where I'm like, oh, I've heard these verses before. Jesus like calls these verses out in the New Testament. 25 verses 21 to 22. If an enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he's thirsty, give him water to drink. You will heap burning coals on his head. I try to read too fast. And then a not so pleasant verse, 26 verse 11. Like a dog that returns to its vomit.
Gross.
Is a fool who repeats his folly. So that idea of a dog returning to its vomit is also something we hear in the New Testament too. So not the most pleasant of verses, but it's like, whoa, I recognize those. I've heard those before. Jesus talks about them.
Jesus loves quoting the Old Testament. I mean, one, because the New Testament wasn't written yet, so he couldn't necessarily quote it.
Quote himself.
But I always think it's hilarious when people want to take the route of like, well, I care a lot more about what Jesus had to say. It's like, well, what Jesus had to say was literally the Old Testament.
The red letters.
Yes, that is a dangerous spot to be when you only care about the red letters, because a lot of the red letters were actually Old Testament black letters. So it's something to be aware of, something to call out. The one thing that stuck out to me, that outside of what you've already covered, chapter 26, verse 18, like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I am only joking. It sticks out to me because I think I like to joke with people, and I think I'm guilty of this many times. And when it starts to come to my attention is when my son starts to do it, who is 8. And he just like straight up lies to people and then says, well, I was only joking. It's like, no, you weren't.
Well, and
you weren't joking.
To clarify though, because I think like I'm joking, like I think anybody can say that. And like it carries different meaning for certain people, because it says in these Proverbs, verses 17 and 22, these Proverbs describe a person who uses his words carelessly.
Yeah.
And I think careless is like an across the board careless.
Yeah, I mean, like my literal thing is like sometimes you're kind of joking, but you're kind of trying to make a point. I'm definitely guilty of that. So like I'm just full transparency reading over these Proverbs thinking like, oh man, I should probably do a little bit less joking and be a little bit more wise with the use of my words. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one. I don't think so. But
no, you're not. I mean, I think not only is it joking, it's like sarcasm.
Yeah, sarcasm. Yeah. I actually love sarcasm. I think it's hilarious. But I also know it's wildly offensive a lot of times.
Yep.
So
it is.
Something I can work on. Oh, you're trying to be sarcastic?
Yes.
Is that what you're doing? All right, whatever. Let's get out of here.
Oh, man.
All right, guys. We're going to be reading Proverbs 27 to 29, so we'll be doing a little bit more of the director's cut tomorrow. We'll see you then. Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.